Hey guys, welcome to another podcast, another conversation of the Yacht. My name is James. Kind of give a little background information on me. I am a veteran. I served in Iraq. I served in Afghanistan. First time with the Marines, second time with the Seabees. Um, and I have that perspective in terms of influences upon my thinking. Thomas Aquinas, Soren Kierkegaard, Albert Camus. So clearly pretty involved with existentialism. Additionally, David Hume and Kant uh, are also some thinkers that I'm into, and along with Hegelian synthesis. So Hegel, I think, are so far influences upon my thinking in terms of how I arrive at certain oughts and conclusions. So that's a little bit. So when you're sitting here saying how does this person come to be, that's kind of how I come to be. Um, Today I want to talk a little bit about material determinism and free will. It's kind of like been my conversation that I've had with my buddy today. Uh, Kind of like where my stance is I am a material determinist, is where I like 80-20 land. I think that maybe maybe there's some potential, because I acknowledge that there are truly random things in the universe. Um, uh, when we talk about, like in terms of randomness, like decay rates for radioactive materials, the decay rates are very well known, but the uh, the specific moment of decay is fundamentally random. Now, randomness is not necessarily free will, but I wonder if, this idea, could I choose to go left when, the dominoes force me to go right? Well, I mean, if we have randomness in the universe, is it possible that maybe somewhere in that mess lies free will? So maybe some kind of soft determinism, maybe some compatibilism, maybe. Uh, I was talking to my friend, and he's saying, from my Hegelian background, my Hegelian framework of thesis, antithesis, boom, synthesis, he thinks that's where, for me, maybe that's where free will is coming from, is in that synthesis moment. And I'm not so sure. I mean, I get where he's coming from, and um, uh, you know, uh, but I think that there's more at work in the subconscious when it comes to free will than conscious thought. But I don't want to come off arrogantly and say, no, material determinism is definitively the only logical answer, and you should think it too. Hot, hot, hot. I don't agree with that. Like I said, I'm kind of like 80-20. Like, I could be convinced in some sort of soft determinism. I definitely 100% don't think libertarian free will does actually exist. I just I don't see any mechanism for it, and kind of like the reasons why, right? Because again, I like engaging with apologists, not in a "you're wrong and stupid" kind of way, but just in a, well, this is my thoughts. I hear where you're coming from. But a lot of times when, they say, like, I know Frank Turk really likes to ask, do you believe in free will? And if your answer is yes, he's like, aha, free will requires a soul, because what atom, what cell inside of you is the decider cell, the decider atom, right? And so if you say, yes, I believe in free will, I think a lot of apologists think that means you have to agree with some kind of supernatural, some kind of soul element, some ensoulment inside you is where that free will must come from. Because they understand from a material determinist perspective, like they get it. They're like, yeah, free will is, from that standpoint, is obvious, or is obviously not something that actually exists, but I think a lot of people think that that is very depressing. So we'll kind of get into it. So for me, why I don't agree with the supernaturalistic claims. And this is something that I talk with my Christian friends about, and I ask them because I want to hear and I'd love to hear your response. Tell me what you think, but what I think about when it comes to soul and what I think about when it comes to free will, I think about Phineas Cage, right? And I think about kind of the end stage of syphilis, right? And I think about, so we're talking about mechanistic injury, we're talking about disease affecting the physical brain. And what it does is it affects the software, it affects the conscience. It changes or can change fundamentally who you fundamentally are. You know what I'm saying? It can change dramatically your personality. And so it gets to the question of, if we have a soul, what exactly is the soul? I think a lot of us think the soul is me, just in a better body. I think when you read Paul's letters, the Pauline letters, he's talking about an indestructible, perfect body, and it'll happen in the moment of moments. It'll be an instantaneous, and we'll have these perfect, indestructible light or air bodies or but it's some kind of physical, perfect, indestructo bodies is what we'll be into. But again, is that our soul? Is our soul our consciousness? Is our soul, like when I say, the id, or who I am, the essence of James, that's the soul. But, I think about so much of that, how much of me is really just processing data, sensory inputs, from light, from sound, from my own voice, from tactile, that kind of stuff. I wonder how much of it is genuinely conscious, me that's going on in there. So, but again, like I said, when I think about soul, I'm not convinced that we have one, not to say that I am like, grr, I don't want to have a soul, rar, I'm fairly, if I have one, I have one. If I don't have one, I don't have one. It's not changing ultimately how I'm going to live my life. And, but maybe if somebody has some really, really interesting, really significant response there, that might change my mind. Of course, I'd love to hear it. But again, I'm just not convinced. I think that who I am, if it can be affected by physical changes to my brain, then the brain obviously is or ultimately is where the me-ness, the I-ness, the id exists, the ego, all that. It's, the lizard brain, all that is ultimately a product of a physical, naturalistic brain, as opposed to something supernatural, supranatural, the soul, whatever you want to call it. I find it to be quite doubtful. But again, I'm not speaking in definitives. This is not I can't preach the good word of definitively the soul does not exist. I'm just saying that the claims about it, I think, are not, they're just not there. I just don't see it as convincing. But again, change my mind, please give me some resources that I'm not aware of. But either way. So since I don't have anything supernatural, I don't have anything, I'm looking at the natural universe and saying to myself, how can I have free will that defeats my, like I said, 80-20 stance on hard material determinism? And, so like I said, I'm quite taken with Hegel. I think that in my own personal life, when we talk about diversity, and I know that people on certain spectrums, I know Charlie Kirk was quite critical of diversity, but I, on the other hand, am not. I think that the more antitheses that we run into, the more syntheses that we run into or that we develop. And I think that's the true strength of diversity. It's not that, this people or that people are better, that workers are better this, but it's just terms in terms of different life experiences, different lived experiences. For instance, I think that I'm quite jaded when it comes to American economics. I think it's a very hopeless situation. I think that not to make it class warfare, but I think the haves are um, effectively enslaving the have-nots. But we're using prettier language, but the effect is still the same. It's not totally there yet, but I think that that's what we're moving towards. Is we're destroying the middle class, and we're effectively going to have a nation of ultra rich and lots of poor people. And it doesn't matter if we kick out all the immigrants or not. It doesn't change anything. Like that's what we're trending towards. And I think that maybe what helps stop my downward spiral of it's a hopeless situation for young folks is immigrants. Immigrants are coming into this country, and they're putting in the work, and they're finding success. And so how can I believe such things when immigrants are coming to the station with next to nothing and proving me wrong? So right, so it challenges my assumption that we're all screwed, right? So and that's not a bad thing. I think that's a good thing. I want to be wrong on that. I want to believe that our nation truly is great, that opportunity for a rags to riches is still possible, and that, that these things can be done. But and I think immigrants can do that, and can really show it off. And at least, maybe it just makes a mockery of my work ethic. Like, I think I'm a hard worker, but, compared to, my Hispanic brothers and sisters, you know what I mean? And I realize that that can be a little on the racist side, but I'm not entirely sure if it's unwarranted. I think that we all kind of know, like, it is a generalization, and generalizations, especially about race, can be racist. But I think that I don't mean it like from a place of pain or anger. So hopefully, if there's any Hispanics listening, and if you're feeling offended, please reach out. I'm sorry, it's not intentional. I'm just saying from my personal experience. And when I've spoken with Hispanics as well, they acknowledge that it's part of their culture. And so, as a middle-aged white guy, I can respect that, and I definitely think that it's a it's an admirable cultural trait, and something that we can learn from. So, and also there's some historical context. Is I believe Baghdad was at one point basically the cultural center of the world, and part of that success was the fact that they were a trade crossroads, and all of these all these ideas were flowing into their city, and it really developed them. And what kind of screwed them was religious people coming in and saying, we are the shining star, we are perfect, we need to get rid of these dissenting voices, we need to get rid of these divergent thoughts and purify our culture and become a greater, we will cleanse ourselves and be more unified and more clarity of purpose. And what ultimately happened was all those advances stopped because the antitheses were not as prevalent. So the refining of ideas, the grindstone, the pushback of your ideas, when you get insular, what happens is that you get rigid thinking, and then you can't problem solve anymore. And in this way, this is why diversity is a great American strength, and why I disagree with Charlie Kirk and probably the Christian nationalist movement. When it comes to diversity, I think they just got it wrong, and I think they need to maybe study a little bit more and look at world history and look at times where nations have purified themselves, and ultimately what happened was they stagnated. They couldn't problem solve anymore. So that's my 2 cents on diversity. But anyway, so to get back to free will, again, I think that like I said, I'm obviously in our conversation, I'm quite taken with Hegel and his thesis, antithesis, synthesis, because I think there is definitely some truth there. Just like, Jung and the Mass, there's definitely truth in that as well. We talk about living authentically. And obviously we all, I think at some level put mask on. And I think that's also, a thing as well. So there's truth there is what I mean to say by that. So I definitely think that's something to kind of put on the back burner. But um, I never want to come across as just saying I am definitively correct, and everybody that hears these words will be inspired to know what truth is on these things. My bestie doesn't agree with me on any of this stuff. So he frequently, like when I'm just texting, when it's just written, a lot of times it's like it comes off as arrogant, and he's told me, he's like, I have to remind myself of who I'm talking with. But when I read your writing, sometimes it's a little over the top. Uh, so I'm trying to be more humble when I present my positions. It's not that I am definitively correct. It's not that I'm objectively correct. I don't even believe in objective truth. So, objective mental truths. How about that? Like a rock is a rock. I'm perfectly willing to concede that. But I know that some people are anti-realist. I'm not. I think this is reality. I'm not with simulation theory or anything like that. I think that we are the one and only. I don't believe in a multiverse. I think we are the one and only. But when you're a material determinist, the whole, there's a James who turned left when I turn right, infinitely, or, at least a mind-bogglingly huge number of, zeros and ones, yes, nos, left, rights, if then statements, to make up the multiverse. I don't think a decision that of turning left warrants the creation of a brand new universe. Just from an energy standpoint, sounds ridiculous just to say it out loud. But I think that quite possibly, like I said, 80-20, I'm pretty convinced that material determinism is the correct answer. So let's get to some odds. Let's presume material determinism is correct. So what are the odds? What do we glean from that? So as you heard from the beginning, Soren Kierkegaard, Albert Camus, existentialism, obviously it's something I think that material determinists we have to look into, right? I'm strapped into a roller coaster that has highs and lows. The decisions in my life is the track. I can't shift it. I'm stuck on the roller coaster. So what are my options? I'm along for the ride. So very Albert Camus like, I say let's rebel. Let's raise up our hands and just go woo, and just have a good time. I mean, smile, like, laugh at the absurdity of it, love passionately. I think that for me, the more I talk about this with my friends and my colleagues, and the more I think about it, the more I think that ultimately the correct answer is to land on, I can feel a sneeze coming, land on, oh, it's coming. So sorry. Again, I don't know how to edit, so you're going to have to live with the sneeze. But I think, we just got to rebel in terms of the absurd. Like, acknowledge, yes, it's absurd. Our lives are absurd, in the grand cosmic scope, it is meaningless, but in the here and now, we can find our own meaning. I value my wife. I value my friends. But beyond Albert Camus, really want to stress like the grounding for my moral and ethical framework. And, it's not quite the absurdity that Soren Kierkegaard and Albert Camus were reacting to. I think that why I think life intrinsically has value is, what do I know about the universe? I know the universe is expanding. That's at least our modern cosmological perspective. The universe, is 13.8 billion years old, give or take, and is infinitely expanding. It'll expand forever. And that's what all signs currently point to. Until new information is presented, that's what we're going to go with. So what does that mean? Well, we know that if the universe expands infinitely, that, as Neil deGrasse Tyson speaks, the universe is going to, not go out with fire, but go out with a whimper. We're gonna experience the heat death of the universe, and that is ultimately all she wrote on the finite life givingness of our universe. So, and that's going to go into a lot of apologetical, areas, because a lot of times when we talk about the fine tuning, of the universe, it doesn't matter that the universe is going to at some point stop being life permitting. I know with the fine tuning argument, they say that, the fact that the universe is even capable of life is in itself too miraculous to say naturalism provided that. So, but this isn't an apologetical, video, so I'm not going to really respond to that quite so much. But I'm going to say that, when we compare the finite to the infinite, right? So, even though it's going to take trillions and trillions of years to get to the heat death of the universe, we have to at least acknowledge with infinity that, even trillions and trillions of years is ultimately going to be insignificant when compared to eternal, right? To eternity. At some point, you'll look at the scale and you'll see this flicker of a flicker, and that'll be all the time our universe was capable of supporting life. And you'll just see this massive line, and each pixel of that line represents gazillions and gazillions of years, squared to the triple, to the quadruple, to the nth degree, yada, yada, yada. And it'll just be this massive line. Like, that's what I say, like, conceptually, you can't actually conceive, like, you can't imagine infinite. Whatever you imagine infinite is, just know that that is, insignificant compared to true infinity. You can't conceive it, but we can at least acknowledge the concepts of it, I think. So, any finite thing is ultimately insignificant when compared to the infinite. And if the time period of life permissiveness in our universe is finite, then, and if everything is infinite, then that finite period of time where the universe is life supporting or life permissive is ultimately insignificant to the greater scale of infinity. So, I think that what that means is, like, does that mean diamonds and, coal and this and that and these, rare earth element, or is it truly rare? Like, when compared to that, I like that stuff is going to stuff is still going to be here, maybe frozen. Like, can imagine a frozen dark earth floating in space forever. We can imagine frozen, rocks, frozen bricks of silver, floating endlessly in the universe. So that stuff will always be there, the whole idea that you can't destroy matter or energy, the thing is, though, that life, on the other hand, can. So I think that silver and gold and rare earth minerals can exist post heat death of the universe. So what is the true finite resource? Or what is the true rare resource in our universe? And it is life, in my opinion. I think that is ultimately where I ground my morality. Where does value for living things come from? It comes from a scarcity model. There's so little life that ultimately the greatest, most scarce object, the thing that has the most value, is life. And so we ought be doing everything in our power to minimize pain, suffering, and to expand flourishing. So I know that then evolves into animal ethics. Like, what do I think about eating animals? If I really felt that, do I go to a steakhouse? Do I just say, no, I'll just eat vegetables? Do I think I ought not eat anything, because I'm life, consuming life, then we kind of get into, for me, like, evolutionary ethics, like, well, I'm an omnivore, so I think it's fine. But of course that gets into the is-ought gap. Just because I have canines doesn't mean that, it's moral for me to eat meat, right? just because it is the case that I'm omnivore doesn't mean that, it's moral or ethical for me to consume. But I think that I certain, if life doesn't consume life, because that's this kind of the circle of life, right? Life consuming life is the meaning of life. I'm not too familiar with too many life forms that can consume inorganic material to continue to perpetuate itself. I get that, probably single cell organisms can, break down salts and, poop out organic materials, like the building blocks of how life on Earth started. Obviously the first life forms on Earth, the first single celled whatevers, were consuming inorganic material because everything was inorganic, right? So maybe there's like I said, there's life that does that. But for us, like, do I just advocate for humanity to starve itself? The fact is that I'm breathing in microbes right now, and it's going to go into my digestive tract, and I'm consuming life even just by breathing. So, right? There's single-celled and multi-celled organisms living inside me, and I need them in order to survive. Like, it's a symbiotic relationship, in my gut, and this and that and everywhere. There's single-celled organisms everywhere, and we should be grateful to them, because without them we would probably not be able to survive. So there's a lot of things in that, and so I guess, like, when I think about if life is so precious and rare, how do I feel about eating it? It's kind of like, well, it's the only way I know how to survive. And so I think that, I think it just makes you more respectful of the life that you consume. So when I have a steak, it's not, I think it should be a treat to eat a steak. It shouldn't be something I consume every day. I think it should be a treat, and I should savor it. And I think, obviously, since I'm a material determinist, and, if this is all coming to an end, what do I think? Well, I think I need to value as many of these moments as possible. I need to be more mindful and be more grateful for the experiences I have. And I think that, in terms of how that means we ought act towards one another, I think that means that we need to realize that we are all in solidarity. We're all in lockstep. We're all facing a void at the end. The abyss. Like, death is coming. We all know we're going to die. It's going to happen. Death and taxes, right? So that's the reality of our situation. So, how angst should I be knowing that the end is coming? That, more than likely I've got somewhere between 20 and 40 years, left of my life. Does that mean that I panic and I hate every moment because, the inevitable coming is coming and I can't stop it? I have to, keep moving towards it. I have no choice. There's a children's book that I recently remembered that my mom used to help teach me to read. It's called There's a Monster at the End of This Book. It's a Sesame Street book. I remember it's like my earliest memory of learning how to read with my mom. And it was a fun book. I think it's great for kids. I highly recommend it. It's the idea is that Grover is building all these barriers to prevent you from turning the page, and and each time you turn the page, he's like, "Oh my gosh, you're here! We're trying to stop you. There's a monster at the end of the book. Stop, stop, stop! Don't turn the page." But you turn the page anyway, because it's the only way to get to the end of the story. And at the end of the story, it's just Glover, and he's like, "Oh, well, I guess the monster at the end of the book was always just me." As a kid, I took a very different lesson from that. But now, as an adult, I'm like, wow, that's a existential book. It's a book about existentialism, and it's what is there to fear at the end of our books, at the end of our lives. It's just ourselves in those final moments. I think that's what makes death so scary for us, is because it's the final departure. We're no longer with humanity. We're taking a step, and we're doing it alone. And I think that it can be quite terrifying, but part of me finds it really quite unifying with the rest of humanity. Like, great or small, we all die, right? The most powerful person on the earth is going to die. The most, same as anybody else. It doesn't matter if you're lying on a bed with, gold sheets, and you have the greatest medical technology attached to you, you're still going to die like the poorest person in the poorest place. So I think that morally obligates us as human beings, in solidarity, to try to raise up the poorest paupers and try to help them and try to um, stand with all of our fellow humans, and genuinely think all of them as brothers and sisters, because when it comes to, biologically, we're not brothers and sisters, obviously, but spiritually, I think that mentally, consciously, we are all together. We are all experiencing the same experience, which is life, and that the vast majority of us, are going to realize that this life is going to end, and no one knows for sure what happens. You can be the most faithful person of your religious beliefs. You can really be like, but I think in that moment, you're going to have a twinge. I think we all have twinges of existential crises. Most of my existential crisis is over. I experienced most of that when I was going through middle school. Really, I just had a lot of existential crises then. And I kind of fell on some truths that helped me get through that. There were truths for me at that time. And now when I look back on it, I think, like, if I'm wrong, if there is, experience after death, if there is an afterlife, I have some different views on what that's going to look like compared to what I was raised to believe. I'm not convinced that, I'm not convinced by Thomas Aquinas. I think he makes some good arguments. I think he builds kind of like what we wish to be true. But I think, unfortunately, both life, the problem of evil, problem of divine hiddenness, and the Holy Scriptures themselves paint a very different picture from what we would want. But that's a whole other discussion. We'll have to get into it later. But I think that ultimately sums up what I really wanted to say today about, trying to figure out where we're at with free will, some of my rejections of some of the supernaturalistic claims about where free will might come. I think we have to look at the material universe and try to figure out how free will could arise, if free will even exists. But we'll see. If you ran into this video, it's quite possible you were always going to run into this video. You couldn't avoid it. If you don't run into it, it's possible that, you were always going to never run into it. Who knows, right? So love to hear your comments. Love to see any reaction videos to it. Whatever you guys want to say, speak your truth. Be kind, be respectful. I will endeavor to be kind and respectful in return. Thank you so much for your time, and have a wonderful rest of your day.